This detailed tutorial will show you how to use two of my favorite products. It is the Amaco Velvet Underglaze series, and they have a wonderful set of underglaze watercolors to create results that you can't always get from your regular glazes. If you love learning about art, hit that subscribe button and support this public school teacher's side hustle. I am applying this to a clay mask I made as a demo piece with my Art 2 students, and I'm using first the Velvet Underglaze, and I'm just going to use the color black that I watered down. Now you can do this on clay that has not been fired, but I find the results are better if you apply it to bisqueware, clay that's been fired once. These glazing brushes are excellent. I'll put all of my materials in the description box, and I love this set because there's such a variety of different styles of brushes. I am taking a small amount of jet black and pouring it into a cup so I can control how much I water it down. Now you can mimic this technique with India ink and not glaze if you're looking to not use your kiln again. And I like to water them down so that they get in the textures and the cracks and crevices. You can also use these underglazes and you can put 3 coats and they can fire really bright, really opaque, but I kind of like the watercolor toned down approach. So with my watered down underglaze, I am taking my bamboo brush, I am brushing it on, and then I'm taking a clean sponge and I'm wiping away to reveal the white color of the clay, but like a grayish dark color in the cracks and crevices. So this is perfect for pieces that you want to have an aged or antique look, or if you're just looking for something that's not just one flat color. That's my complaint with lots of glazes, is it's hard to get the nuance of making something as if you painted it, and I'm a painter. I like detail. I love the nuance and blending of color. So I feel like this gives me a painterly approach where I can kind of control how my colors turn out. You can see I added a little bit more because it was kind of gray, and the longer you leave it on, of course, it dries, and then you'll have a darker black in your cracks and crevices. You can also play around with how wet your sponge is, and don't be scared because you can rinse this in the sink if you need to get all of the, if you apply too much. So this time I'm going to apply more than I did. I'm going to let it sit a little bit longer than I did, and then with that same sponge, I'm wiping away. You can see that I'm getting a better result in my cracks and crevices. I love how this plays with the texture of clay, and I really encourage my students to not just use smooth as one texture, but to go in and create raised and carved surfaces, and this really enhances surface decoration that you may have spent a lot of time on. The other glazes might just not highlight or emphasize in the same way. And again, you can imitate this technique with actual watercolor. You can also imitate this with India ink, and then you can spray with a clear coat, and it doesn't have to go in the kiln again. But if you're teaching a ceramics class or you want to do a glaze firing, this is just an excellent technique. I've used it for years with my students, and the results never disappoint. I also love that you can keep it really simple. I could just do black and white, and it would just give it the effect I'm looking for without going too crazy with color. I sped things up here because I'm repeating my steps, putting on a layer, letting it dry just a little bit, taking that clean sponge, and then wiping away to whatever degree I want it to be light or dark. You can layer your underglaze, so if you need to do more layers to get the dark effect you're going for. And because I added so much, I did clean my sponge so that I can really get those lighter areas. I'm also going to go in with some other colors, and so I don't want it to just be black and white, although I am tempted to leave it that way. I'm going to add a little bit of color to this mask. I'm going to keep it pretty simple, but I do want to give it a little bit more nuance of color than just the black and white. Now, if you've ever used red clay, it looks fantastic over the Amaco red clay. That's one of my favorite techniques, but I don't have that. I'm only using the white clay at my new school. But if you ever have that red clay, this is such a great glazing technique. It really amplifies textures, and the red just fires so beautiful. I feel like for many pieces, it doesn't even need a glaze layer as far as an extra color. So the technique is pretty simple. Wipe it on, let it sit for a little bit, wipe it off, and make sure you pay attention to all the sides and edges of your piece. You will see me pick up my piece and kind of look at those edges, and then if there's any area you want extra dark, like the inside of a mouth, the shadows of the eye, you can always go back in and layer that as well. I'm going to speed things up here since it's repeating my steps, and then we're going to talk about adding a little bit of color to this clay mask. Don't forget to pick it up, turn it around, and look at all the edges so you can see it from multiple angles and you're sure that you got it the way you want it. Now, for a really fun material, the Amaco Watercolor Underglazes. Same technique. So underglaze is just clay with a pigment, so colored clay. And to make it shiny, you have to apply a clear coat, which we'll do in the end. What I love about this is it has your colors just like a watercolor pan, and I love watercolor painting, so this feels so natural for me. Paint exactly like you would with watercolor. Now, if you want to build up your layers to make it opaque, just like with regular watercolors, let it dry and layer at least 3 times. If you want a watery effect, or if you want an effect where it's really loose, then you would do 1 or 2 layers. Just know that the color is very faint and you do have to build up to get those vibrant results. That's why I like it, is it's not heavy-handed, you can slowly build, and with this tiny detail brush, I can use it like paint. And as a painter, I really appreciate that. Students often have a really hard time using glazes, craftsmanship, getting in, all of your edges, making sure to actually let it dry and get 3 coats. You might have a student who makes just a beautiful piece, but then the glazing is not as great. So I really like these products because you can explore different materials and get the results you're looking for. So my goals with this is I want the eyes to be kind of dramatic, so I'm going to put the most coats on them, and then I want a very faint kind of pinkish color on the lips and the cheeks, just to warm it up a little bit, but I'm still going to mainly do black and white. So I'm using this color here just to give the lips just a little bit of a stain, a little bit of a pinkish warmth. I'm going to do the same thing in the cheeks. I'm not going to layer multiple times, and the reason why is I don't want it to look like a clown that put on lipstick in the car and just had these awkward, really bright lips. I want it very neutral, just a little bit of warmth. I'm doing the same thing on the cheeks here, and I could just leave it black and white. That's totally an option, but I'm playing around with these watercolors, seeing what it looks like if I just warm it up just a touch. So something to remember is if I fired this in the kiln right now, it would look just like this. There is no shine or gloss to these underglazes. In fact, the black is velvet, which means it's not shiny. It has that velvet kind of matte finish. So I get to decide later on what I want to be shiny and what I don't want to be shiny. I think I'm going to see if I can make the lips a little bit more dramatic without making them look awkward. So I'm going to take this other set of colors, and again, I'll put all 3 sets, the link in my description box, and I'm going to use this because it's a little bit brighter. Again, I don't want it to look, awkwardly bright, but I think with the eyes, just a little bit more detail on the lips is a good balance. I also had these coils at the top of the head that I'm going to play around with, and I think I'm going to take that green that I used and repeat that color up at the top. Still want this to be super neutral. I'm not going to add too much, and I'm going to add a little bit of red in the corners of my eye to give it that lifelike effect. Very subtle, and these last a long time because of how little students or you will use. I'm going to swatch a little bit on the cheeks. Looks a little much, so I'm going to take my sponge and blot it. And again, if I let this dry and then blotted it, it would stay on there a little bit more. If you've ever played with watercolor, it really feels very similar. Let's take this blue and kind of add that towards the center just to give it a little bit more drama, a little bit more emphasis. I want my eyes to really speak. And if you're interested in how to make a clay portrait or a clay mask, I'll put the link to that description, or I'll put the link to that video above. I'm going to wipe away a little bit of that red on the lips because I don't want the clown effect. Not that there's anything wrong with clowns, I just want it to be very subtle, very subdued, so I don't want it to be too red. Same thing with the cheeks. Okay, so the top of this sculpture, let's add a little bit of green. I did this as a demo piece, so I don't really know what these coils represent. They're kind of snake-like, like a Medusa vibe. They could be vines. It was really just an exercise in texture and how to think outside the box and not just make a portrait that looks like a person, but explore metaphor or symbolism. So I'm just gonna make them green because it reflects the eyes, and it also kind of lends itself to being, like I said, maybe it's a snake, maybe it's a vine, and so that's just a really nice contrast. And I'm gonna do just 1 layer. I could make these super detailed. So if I wanted this to be more opaque, like a traditional gloss glaze, you would just let it dry and layer it at least 3 times. So you can kind of change your effects, like maybe the vines or the snakes would be super, super green and everything else would be loose and watercolor-like. So if you do want to build up with these underglazes, just let it dry, and then the more layers you add, the more opaque it will be, just like watercolor, and you can build your color from there. Before I call it finished, I'm going to then make my eyebrows a little bit more dramatic. I feel like they blend in a little bit. So I'm going back to that black underglaze that I watered down, and I'm just gonna do one more layer of watered down black in the eyebrows to give a little bit more contrast, to draw attention to them, and to really amplify the textures that I have created. So anything you wanna be darker or wipe away, do a little check and either wipe more away with your sponge or add a little bit more. Now, everything you saw me do with the watercolors, you can do with the underglazes as well. So if I wanted to use a little bit of pink on the cheeks and the lips, I could have taken a pink velvet underglaze, watered that down, and applied it the same way I did the black. So it's such a versatile way to kind of add color. I don't have a lot of variety of underglaze colors right now. I'm using the watercolor pan instead, but it's kind of the same technique, and you can use it without watering it down too to create a more opaque effect. If I wanted it to not be shiny and be matte, I could leave it just like this and put it in the kiln and it would be permanent. However, if you want it to be shiny or glossy, use this liquid gloss glaze, and it's pink, but don't worry, it fires clear or transparent. And to get a true glossy effect, you want 3 coats where it dries between each coat. This time I'm using a large brush and I'm gonna have everything shiny. I considered just making the eyeballs, the lips, and the green coils at the top shiny, but I wanna just put it on the whole thing and kind of see what it looks like. And again, if you don't want it shiny, just carefully with a smaller brush, avoid those areas and they'll look exactly the way they look now, just permanent. And I'm going to brush on, making sure that in my cracks and crevices, the glaze doesn't pull up too much. You want a nice even coat. And you will have to do 3 coats to get the right effect, and it needs to dry between each coat. I'm gonna speed things up a little bit here since I'm simply taking a large brush and making sure the glaze is coating the whole surface. This is where paying attention to detail and craftsmanship is really important. Unlike painting, if you miss a spot, it's not so easy just to go back and add more. So pick it up, look at it from all angles, make sure the glaze is in a nice even layer, not too thick, and that you don't miss any spots. Then the hard part is you do have to let it completely dry before adding your second coat. I don't know if you've ever put on nail polish and you try to put the second coat before the first coat dries and all it does is push around the top coat. It's the same thing with painting. It really does need to dry all the way before adding your second coat, or it will kind of blend in.
Just in case you forget where you put the past and then
after you let it dry, using the same brush, put a second coat. And this does dry very quickly. So if you have a fan, you could put it in front of a fan. If you're doing this in a classroom, you can definitely do multiple coats per class period. Just make sure that students are paying attention to it actually being dry and not saying, oh yeah, I put on 3 coats, when really they just pushed around the first coat 3 times. I do not know why the glaze is pink. It looks like Pepto-Bismol to me, but it is, and it works, I promise. Students are always like, oh my gosh, it's covering up my work, or, it's hard to imagine this pink turning into like a glossy, just transparent or translucent cover. And you do need to let your glazes dry before putting on your glaze, so your underglazes. If you were to not let them dry, this would push it around and give it kind of a hazy effect. So make sure everything is dry before you do another coat. Speaking of another coat, once it's completely dry, let's speed things up and do our third and final coat. This is a low fire glaze that has to be fired to cone 04 bisqueware. So if you are doing the underglaze on clay you haven't fired, you do have to fire that first before you add this. I never do it that way. And then you put it in the kiln and you fire that bad boy up to cone 05. After it's been fired, this is what it looks like. You can see very similar to what it looked like before, except for shiny. Look at the green on the top, it has that watercolor effect. That's the back, what it looks like, before you add in any decoration. The eyes are more vibrant. The pink you can barely see, so if you wanted to add more detail in that way, do multiple coats. Here's a student example where she wanted to paint a very specific skin tone and more detail in her eye, and she used the watercolor underglazes, and then the brown is just a regular gloss glaze. This student used the same technique I did, except she used the brown underglaze watercolor and a combination of the black watered down underglaze as well as I did. So she wanted to give her horse kind of an aged effect, and so she did a really great job with her textures, and this technique is perfect for that style of art. Thank you so much for sticking around and making art with me, and if you're interested in more clay tutorials, check these out. Find my Instagram at thatartteacher_Machado to see what my students are up to in my classroom, and my website thatartteacher.com has full-length lesson plans, student examples, and rubrics, all for free.